Hey everyone, welcome back to more Reddit tree loss stories. Picture this. Your neighbor illegally takes down your protected trees just to get a better view, then has the nerve to expect you to thank him for it. What followed ended up costing him nearly $500,000. Let's jump straight into it. The first one is a pro-revenge story titled "Smug Neighbor Cut Down My Trees for a Better View Now Owes Me $450,000." And our /tree loss story. For some background, I own a small, older cabin on a lake. Not the wealthy side, either. It's a stepped lot with stairs leading down from the road. Lots of roots and rocks, basically held in place by trees and sheer willpower. Along the uphill property line, there used to be a row of large pines. Not redwoods or anything like that, but tall enough to block the view of the massive house sitting above mine. And yeah, those trees were the only barrier between my little deck and my neighbor's enormous glass wall that he liked to call his window to the lake lifestyle. I'm nothing fancy. I hold a casual job that occasionally lets me work remotely. The cabin is my personal sanity refuge. Morning coffee on the deck, dog dozing at my feet, a tree swing, the lake up front, and privacy in the back. Absolute perfection. I understood those trees were important, not just sentimentally either. The hillside is steep, and those roots are the only reason my property doesn't gradually creep toward the water every time it rains heavily. On top of that, my county has fairly strict shoreline regulations. Trees growing along the water and on steep slopes are protected. You could do reasonable trimming, but if you start clear cutting, you are inviting serious trouble. I had actually done everything by the book before any of this started. When I first purchased the property, I hired a legitimate arborist to assess the trees, put together a health report, and file it with the county because I didn't want to get penalized someday for something the previous owner had done. A conservation officer from the county also came out, examined the slope and the lake setback, and logged everything into their system. So there was solid documentation confirming the trees were healthy, specifically noted as erosion protection and covered under shoreline protection rules. I filed all of that away and got on with my life. Then the uphill house changed hands. The previous owners were quiet, retired folks who mostly used it as a vacation spot and occasionally waved hello. They were perfectly fine. The new owner was a different story entirely. He showed up like a walking advertisement for some upscale lifestyle brand. Polished shoes that had clearly never touched dirt. Loud phone calls out on the deck. A giant SUV. All of that. The type of guy who says, "I'm in consulting, but can't actually explain what that means without dropping the word strategic at least 4 times. I met him his very first weekend there. I was hauling groceries down the stairs to my cabin when I heard someone shouting from above, "Hey buddy." I looked up and spotted him leaning over his metal and glass railing like a movie villain who happened to own a golf course. I gave him the standard polite neighbor wave and called back, "Hey." He pointed at my trees. "You're the cabin guy?" "Yeah, that's me. Those trees of yours are destroying my view." I thought he was being sarcastic, so I kind of laughed and said, "Yeah, they've been here longer than either of our houses, man." He didn't find it funny, though. "I paid for a lake view," he said, "not pine trunks." I just replied, "Good thing you've still got about 90% of the lake right in front of you," and kept walking. He was not pleased with that answer. Over the following weeks, whenever our schedules happened to overlap, he would bring it up again, always circling back to the view, property values, and the neighborhood aesthetic. He kept treating my cabin as though it were some temporary structure someone had simply neglected to demolish. He came down my staircase once without being invited and launched into it. "Look, I'm trying to be reasonable here. If you just take off, say, the top 10 feet of those trees, we both come out ahead. You keep some privacy, I get the view I paid for." I told him plainly, "Can't do it. They're protected. The county has them on file. Also, that slope shifts without those roots. I like to keep my house where it is." He did that forced laugh that sounds like a scoff. "Oh, come on, don't be dramatic. Trees grow back. I'll even cover the trimming cost." "It's not about money," I said. "It's not legal, and I'm not interested." That was the first time he gave me that little smirk I would come to truly despise. "We'll see," he said, and headed back up. I should have recognized that as a warning sign right then. He began making little remarks whenever he ran into me. Things like, "My realtor says your trees are shaving value off both our properties." Or, a good neighbor thinks about more than just himself. That kind of thing. I stayed polite. I prefer living quietly, and I've dealt with worse people at work. But I did send an email to the county conservation office asking them to confirm in writing once more that the trees were still listed as protected and whether any regulations had changed. They replied that nothing had changed. The trees were documented. The slope was classified as a landslide risk if vegetation were removed. Yada yada. I saved that email. Then came a work trip. I was away for a stretch. The dog was at my friend's place. The cabin was locked. I also had a camera aimed at the front door, mostly so I could holler at delivery drivers through my phone. The first day or two, nothing happened. But then the footage hit its storage limit, and I didn't bother checking because I was caught up with work. That small detail would matter later. I came back, drove up, parked at the roadside spot, started heading down the stairs with my duffel bag, and stopped dead about halfway down. Something fell off. My brain took a moment to register it, because I was so accustomed to the view being filtered through green. But suddenly the light was strange, bright, too bright. I glanced to my right where the tree line should have been, but it was just gone. Not lightly trimmed, not shaped, completely gone. Stumps with chips, bare dirt. I had a straight sight line across into Mr. V's yard and his wide, open deck, as though someone had yanked a curtain back in a theater. I just stood there on the stairs holding my bag, my stomach in knots. My yard looked like a demolition site. The slope that had always appeared as a shaded, wooded area was nothing but brown, raw, muddy ground. I walked the rest of the way down in a daze. Up close, it was even worse. The pines had been cut close to the ground, maybe a foot up. Every smaller tree, shrub, and fern that had grown beneath them was gone too. Just churned up soil and some exposed roots poking out. There were ruts from some kind of small machine. One of my fence posts at the bottom was cracked. On my deck table was a folded piece of paper held down by a rock. I knew exactly who it was from before I even opened it. Inside, written in big loopy handwriting, it read, "You're welcome for the new view. You will see that this improves both our property values long term. You really ought to thank me." I stood there holding that note and just went completely still. No shouting, no dramatic breakdown, nothing. Just this kind of numb buzzing in my ears. My first reaction was panic. I walked down my little path to the edge of the slope and looked over. You could literally see where small rivulets had already begun cutting through the dirt from the last rainfall. It hadn't even been that long, and things were already changing. The hillside looked like it was simply waiting for a reason to give way. My second reaction was anger, but a cold, concentrated kind of anger. The kind where your mind quietly starts assembling a checklist on its own. I went back into the cabin, pulled out the folder with my original arborist report and the county emails, and sat at the table reading through them as if it were an exam. Every tree was listed with location, species, and condition, along with photographs. The county file number was right there. The email from just a few weeks earlier confirming they were still locked as protected was there too. It was all accounted for. I took photographs of everything outside, wide shots of the entire cleared line, close-ups of stumps with a tape measure, chunks of bark left behind, the torn-up soil, the note. I went up the stairs and took photos from the road. I got a shot of his wide-open view with my bare hillside front and center. Then I called the arborist who had done the original report. He remembered me immediately. Apparently, people who proactively document their shoreline trees are a rare breed. I explained what had happened. He was quiet for a moment, then simply said, "I'll be there tomorrow. Don't touch anything." Then I called the county conservation office. I expected to get lost in voicemail purgatory, but instead, the moment I said that my protected shoreline trees had been cut down without my permission while I was away, they transferred me to someone who sounded like this was their Super Bowl. They scheduled an inspection for the following day as well and told me not to disturb the site. Same instruction as the arborist. And hey, since we've gone through many tree loss stories here, if someone cut down trees on your property, what would you do in Opie's position? Let me know in the comments. And while you're at it, please don't forget to hit like on the video since it helps me out tremendously. Thank you so much. After handling all of that, I called my insurance agent just to ask whether I should be reporting anything to them. She told me they typically don't handle intentional damage caused by third parties, but she made notes and advised me to gather every piece of documentation I could, because this sounded like a classic tree trespass situation. Her words, "It was only after all of that I allowed myself to walk up to his fence and look. He was on his deck, naturally, wine glass in hand, sunglasses on, looking like an advertisement for a lakeside rental. He spotted me, waved as if nothing at all was wrong, and called out, 'Looks way better, right?' I called back, 'We're not having this conversation.' He shrugged, 'Suit yourself. You'll thank me when you see your next appraisal.' I turned around and walked away, because at that point anything I said wouldn't have been constructive. Also, I didn't trust myself not to say something I'd regret in front of witnesses. The next day, the cavalry showed up. First was the arborist. He walked the entire cleared line, took precise measurements, counted growth rings on a cut section, muttered to himself now and then, and kept shaking his head. 'These were healthy,' he said. 'Every single one.' 'How long were you gone?' 'Just a stretch,' I said. 'Whoever did this was in a hurry,' he said. 'Sloppy cuts, everything dragged out fast.' I could put together a full report with replacement costs and appraised value. I asked, 'When you say value, what exactly do you mean?' He said, 'People always assume trees are just decoration. They're actually assets. Shade, privacy, erosion control, windbreak, noise reduction, wildlife habitat. There's an actual dollar figure attached to all of that, and that's what we'll be calculating.' Then the county officials arrived. 2 of them, one with a tablet, one with a notebook. They took photographs, verified coordinates, and pulled up my original file. You could watch their expressions grow tighter with every step they took. The tablet guy finally asked, 'Who did this?' I pointed up at the glass palace above. I couldn't personally confirm he had held the chainsaw himself, but his note was sitting right there on my deck. The notebook one asked whether I had called the police. I hadn't yet. I was still in document everything first mode. They exchanged a look that said, 'Oh boy, paperwork, but the good kind.' They told me outright that clearing protected vegetation on a slope like that within the shoreline zone was a serious violation. Fines could be assessed per tree, plus restoration orders. They took the note as evidence and asked whether I had any exterior cameras that might have captured the work crew. I told them about the camera that had rolled over to its storage limit, but said I'd check my logs later. Before they left, the tablet guy said, 'Whatever you do, don't attempt to fix this yourself. There's going to need to be a restoration plan. Let the process run. Is my house going to slide into the lake?' I asked, only half joking. 'Not if we move quickly,' he said. 'I'll flag this as urgent.' Then I called a lawyer, one my coworker had recommended when I originally bought the place. I emailed him all the documents, the photos, the county contact details, everything. He called me back, and his opening line was, 'I'm sorry this happened to you, but you may be in a much stronger position than you realize.' He walked me through the concept of timber trespass in my state. Essentially, if someone deliberately cuts down your trees without your permission, they're liable for damages, and those damages can even be multiplied. On top of that, because these were protected shoreline trees, there was an entirely separate layer of fines and mandated remediation from the county that had nothing to do with my personal civil case. His words, not mine. If he thought he was going to pay for a handful of saplings and walk away, he's in for quite a surprise. I asked the important question, do I need to do anything right now other than not commit a crime? He laughed and said, document everything, don't engage. Let the county do their work and start putting numbers together. Don't discuss money with him directly. Don't say anything about lawsuits or legal action. And don't agree to anything verbal. If he contacts you, direct him to go through me from now on. Which, honestly, sounded like paradise. Over the following week, things began moving quickly. The county sent him a notice of violation. I didn't see the letter personally, but I witnessed the fallout. One morning, I stepped outside with my coffee and found him pacing on his deck, phone pressed to his ear, waving his free hand at my property like he was conducting some kind of orchestra. You know that thing where you can't make out the words, but you can tell someone is completely losing it? Exactly that. He stormed down my stairs not long after and came straight up to my deck. I hit record on my phone the instant I saw him coming, because I'm not oblivious, and he opened with, "We need to talk." I said, You need to leave. My lawyer has advised me not to speak with you directly anymore." He actually scoffed. "You got a lawyer over some trees? Come on, let's be mature about this. I'll just cover the landscaping costs. We'll get some smaller trees planted, maybe some shrubs, call it even." I repeated, "All communication goes through my lawyer." He stepped closer and lowered his voice, like we were sharing some kind of secret. "Look, the county overreacts to everything. If you blow this up into a big deal, they're going to drag you into it too. They're telling me there could be major fines, and they'll probably try to pin some of it on you because it's your land. You really want that?" I said, "You came onto my property without permission and removed protected trees. I already contacted them. They know it wasn't me." His expression flickered. He clearly hadn't anticipated that. "You called them?" he said. "Before talking to me?" "Yeah," I said. "You left a note, like a calling card." He tried to shift approaches. "Okay, well, maybe I shouldn't have assumed you'd be grateful, but I did you a favor. Your lot looks more open now. Feels bigger. I was prepared to pay for that out of my own pocket." I just repeated the line my lawyer had given me. "Any offers need to be submitted in writing through my attorney. I'm not discussing this with you directly." He gave me that smirk again. "You're making a mistake," he said. "This could have stayed neighborly, but now it's going to get costly for everyone." I said, "You're right about one thing," and went back inside. I sent the video to my lawyer. He replied, "Thank you. That was very useful." As it turned out, that little exchange was excellent evidence. Number one, he essentially admitted he had done it. Number two, he attempted to minimize it as mere landscaping. And number three, he implied I'd share the blame unless I cooperated. Not a great look for him. Meanwhile, the county was completely serious about moving fast. They brought in an expert who determined that the slope was now unstable enough that a significant storm could trigger a landslide. That prompted an emergency order. Some form of retaining system had to be installed immediately, plus a full vegetation restoration plan, all to be funded by whoever was responsible. Spoiler, not me. And the county sent him a thorough message. He would be fined per tree and per square foot of cleared area, required to hire a licensed contractor to install erosion control measures, and required to engage a landscaping firm specializing in restoration work. There were deadlines. There were warnings of additional fines if he stalled. At the same time, my lawyer completed the updated tree valuation report with the arborist's assistance. That document was staggering. Each tree was listed with species, size, appraised value, estimated replacement cost for something functionally comparable, value of lost privacy, value attributed to increased noise and wind exposure, and contribution to erosion protection. He even quantified the impact on my cabin's overall value due to the erosion risk and the loss of the privacy buffer, plus figures accounting for the fact that I would likely need temporary accommodations during whatever structural repairs ended up being necessary. My lawyer assembled all of this into a clean demand letter. Rather than opening with a maximum worst-case figure, he started with, "Here's what the law permits. Here's the minimum we would pursue in court. And here's an opportunity to settle for somewhat less if you agree promptly." It was still a frightening number. I won't share the exact initial figure he demanded, but it was solidly into 6 digits before any multipliers were applied. We waited. I had to vacate the cabin a couple of times during heavy rain warnings because nobody could be fully certain nothing would shift. The neighbor attempted to approach me a few more times, and I stopped answering the door entirely. I once heard him mutter something loud enough to carry over, something like "unbelievable," over trees. Then his lawyer responded. They opened with the standard legal posturing. Their client believed he had received verbal permission. He absolutely had not. He had misunderstood the regulations and was acting in good faith to maintain views in line with neighborhood standards, and so on. They offered to cover some replanting costs and a modest sum for my inconvenience, which honestly wouldn't have even paid for the arborist bill. My lawyer sent back a polite but firm rejection, attached the video of him essentially confessing on my deck, and included a copy of the county violation packet that made it abundantly clear this wasn't simply a neighbor dispute. It was him against the local government, plus me. That's when things began to shift significantly. The county scheduled a hearing regarding the violation. Without getting into all the legal details, the key points were, He admitted the trees had been removed. He claimed he believed they were on his property, which fell apart the moment they displayed the property line survey on screen, and he alleged I had said it was probably fine in a prior conversation, which was rather amusing, given that I had literally emailed the county about those trees beforehand and had told him directly on multiple occasions that they were protected. The county officials didn't accept any of it. He was hit with fines for each protected tree removed, additional fines for clearing the understory, a requirement to pay for an engineer-designed retaining structure, and a requirement to fund a multi-year restoration plan using native trees and plants. The total came close to six figures for that component alone, based on my lawyer's later estimate from the paperwork. On my end, the civil case began progressing. There was back and forth, some posturing, arguments over numbers, and a lot of time spent waiting for their side to accept that they were, in technical terms, in serious trouble. Apparently, his lawyer sat him down and explained that if this went to trial, the court could award the full appraised tree value, treble damages under timber trespass law, compensation for the lost property value, costs related to the erosion risk and required construction, and my legal fees, all on top of what the county was already fining him, plus whatever the engineer and restoration contractors were going to charge. At some point, his lawyer must have told him, "You need to cut your losses," because their next offer jumped considerably. Still not enough, though. My lawyer countered again, this time with a detailed breakdown showing precisely how we arrived at our figure. Line by line, no emotion, just math. During all of this, I picked up something amusing through the local gossip network. Apparently, he had been boasting to people at the marina about how he was going to put the cabin guy in his place, and how you can't let some rundown shack ruin $1 million view. After the county hearing and the first round of fines, that bragging transformed into loud complaints to anyone willing to listen. He was apparently telling people the county was corrupt, that they were punishing success, and that this is why you can't invest in property around here. People who had previously fawned over him started giving him a wide berth, because nobody wants to get pulled into that kind of mess, especially when the county is involved too. Anyway, after several rounds of legal back and forth, they finally blinked. Their lawyer came back with an offer. The client would agree to pay a substantial sum, assume full responsibility for the county fines, and cover all required construction and restoration, in exchange for no further claims and a confidentiality clause. My lawyer called me and walked me through everything. It wasn't quite the absolute maximum we might theoretically have extracted if we'd gone the full distance through trial and won every single point, but it was close. And it came with one significant advantage. I wouldn't spend the next couple of years in legal limbo while my hillside sat half-finished. We talked it through, and he told me, if your priority is being made whole and stabilizing that slope, this is a solid offer. If your priority is squeezing every last dollar out of him, we can keep pushing, but there's always risk involved. I thought about my life, my job, my stress levels, and the prospect of being mired in this drama for years to come. So I took the deal. After all the calculations and payouts, combining his direct payment to me with the county-mandated expenses he had to cover separately, the total financial hit to him landed right around $450,000. Not a typo, nearly $500,000, because he desperately wanted a marginally better view of water he already had plenty of. The county fines and required construction were on top of that, a separate bucket entirely. I didn't personally see that money, but I absolutely saw the results. Because here's where it actually got satisfying for me. The county approved a plan to restore the slope. The engineer designed a retaining wall, just tall enough that once everything was completed and the new plantings filled in a bit, my entire yard would be completely screened off. Perfectly legal height, entirely on my side, fully compliant with every regulation. I worked with a landscape architect, paid out of my settlement, on the replanting plan. We didn't just say, okay, put the same pines back and call it done. We got strategic about it. We selected fast-growing evergreens that would provide privacy relatively quickly, along with slower-growing but ultimately taller species that would, over time, create an even more effective screen than the original trees. A dense hedge along the property line, again completely within the rules, but very, very tall as far as shrubs are concerned. The county loved it because it checked all their restoration and habitat improvement criteria. And I loved it because once everything matured, there would be absolutely no scenario in which Mr. View would ever see into my yard again. Construction took a while, of course. My lot looked like a civil engineering demonstration site. For a stretch, concrete trucks, drill rigs, the whole production. Access came partly from the road and partly from my property. But the important part was that every single invoice went to him. I heard through the grapevine that he tried to cut corners at some point, suggesting a smaller wall or fewer plantings. And the county apparently responded with something to the effect of, "You don't get to renegotiate after you've broken the rules. This is the required fix." By the time everything was finished, my hillside looked like a high-end makeover. Brand new retaining walls, proper drainage, clean stone steps running down one side, rich soil across the top, new plantings throughout. I also took the opportunity to redo my deck railings and add a small covered area, all properly permitted, all within the allowed envelope, all overseen by people who understand how to avoid making a hillside collapse. The best moment was watching his expression the first time he realized the wall and the new growth were taller than he'd expected. I was sitting on my deck having a beer with a friend when he stepped out onto his, stopped abruptly, and just stared. He called down, "Is that even legal?" I took a slow sip and said, "County approved the whole plan. You paid for it. Thank you, by the way." He swore under his breath and went back inside. And the next one is a great story from our /petty revenge that you won't want to miss. It's titled, "A Customer Insulted My Co-Worker, so I Got Back at Her." For context, I'm 19 and female, and I work as a cashier at a local grocery store in a smaller city. We deal with rude customers constantly. That's the joy of working in customer-facing jobs. But there was one particular customer who was consistently rude, and we'll call her Mary. Mary always paid in cash to avoid the new credit card fees we charge. Yay tariffs. And she would randomly hand over extra change after we had already cashed her out, meaning we'd have to reopen her transaction to recall the total she'd paid and figure out the correct change to give back. It's annoying in a whole process, but whatever. The customer is always right, I suppose. Which brings me to my breaking point. One of my coworkers was ringing her up. This coworker struggles a bit with math. She's sharp in plenty of ways, but sometimes slower with arithmetic, so she uses a calculator. Mary pulled her usual move and added change after the transaction was already complete. So my coworker pulled out her calculator to double-check the math. Mary then made a comment along the lines of, "That's the problem with this generation. You younger people don't know how to do basic math anymore." Excuse me, what? I was fuming internally but kept my customer service face on and waited until she left before I let myself react. I kept replaying the moment in my head, trying to think of what I could have done, and then it hit me. The next time Mary came back to our store, I made a point of becoming her cashier. I checked her out myself, and she did the exact same thing, adding change after the transaction was already finished. So I did exactly what my coworker had done. I pulled out a calculator, and as expected, Mary made a remark about how this younger generation is hopeless because they can't handle basic arithmetic. I delivered the best performance of my life and said, "I suppose that's what happens when you have a brain tumor." Mary went pale. I pretended to hold back tears as I counted out her change and watched her leave. Hopefully that'll make her think twice before commenting on my coworkers, and maybe it'll stop making everyone's job harder. Edit. For those commenting on the tariff remark, to clarify, I'm not referring to credit card fees charged by the credit card companies themselves. I'm talking about merchant surcharges that have been added. Stores in my state apply surcharges, also known as tariff fees, to cover the increased cost of imported goods like coffee, produce, and so on, which credit card holders pay at checkout. And the next one is another petty revenge story, titled, "My roommate jumps out of bed and sprints to the shower the moment he hears my alarm in the morning." So my roommate is a fan of long, luxurious morning showers that drain every last drop of hot water. I figured out that he literally leaps out of bed and dashes to the bathroom the second he hears my alarm go off. I started setting my alarm to silent for a while, and that worked reasonably well, but I still ended up missing my morning shower multiple times because of his unreasonably long sessions. So I started running 2 alarms. One set about an hour and a half before my usual wake-up time. For roughly 2 weeks now, this has caused him to get up at an absurdly early hour, burn through all the hot water, and finish up with enough time for it to heat back up before I actually need it. Small victories are genuinely satisfying. And yeah, guys, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to check out my full playlist, and I'll see you again soon.